Thomas Horrocks, welcome back to the Gravity Commons podcast.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
You know what? You may have the honor, I don't know if it's an honor, but it's definitely something unique to you that you have the longest time between appearances on our podcast. I believe it's 6.5 years. We had you back on the podcast in 2019.
Yeah.
To talk about power and leadership and how it matters a great deal, the ways we use power as leaders. And it's no longer relevant. It's no longer applicable,
We
really.
fixed it. That podcast fixed
That
it.
fixed everything. No, give us a lot has changed for you in 6.5 years. I wonder if you could just give our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you find yourself doing most days.
Yeah. So I think that was before my deployment,
Yes.
if I remember correctly. So since that time, I had a deployment with the military, went overseas for about a year. While I was over there, small event happened, COVID, if anybody remembers that.
That was years ago, though.
Yeah, so that happened in the middle of deployment. Came back from deployment to working full-time for the Indiana Army National Guard in our COVID response mission. So going all over the state of Indiana, taking care of our soldiers. Uh, in the meantime, I have changed denominations. So I'm still pastoring, but for a different denomination, Disciples of Christ now, pastoring a different church, church down in French Lick. Still living in Bloomington, Indiana. Remarried, so figuring out a blended family life. Remarried, so now I've got some older kids in the mix, and we're currently doing some renovations to the house to make some space for the kids. Ran for office, small little thing in 2024. Ran for state House representative in Indiana. So huge learning curve in getting into the political game. Ended up losing by about 800 votes or 2 points. So it was the second closest race in the state. Yeah, and so now just trying to figure out how to be faithful in all of this.
All of that.
All of
this. So you're a pastor. You've run for political office. You've got a blended family, and you're a military chaplain. And we're doing a little series here on how to be a Christian at the end of democracy, which is maybe a little overblown, right? But it was Ben's idea, and we like to. No, it was my idea. I wonder, Thomas, if you could just talk a little bit about what you do in the military, and what your maybe week to week or month to month life is like as a chaplain.
Yeah. So as a military chaplain, our stated role is to protect the free exercise of religion within the context of the military. So the First Amendment applies to all United States citizens. It also applies to service members. So the first and primary role is to make sure that service members have the right to exercise their religion within the context of the military, within the bounds of any given mission set. So to be a chaplain, you have to be ordained by a recognized ecclesial body, have an ecclesiastical endorsement. So we provide religious services, and we advise the command with regards to ethics, morals, and morale. I would say 80% of the actual work that I do is some sort of pastoral counseling with soldiers who are experiencing various life stressors, right? Going through relationship problems or financial problems or job loss or struggling with issues of many different kinds. And chaplains are often like the first line for these soldiers because within military doctrine, chaplains have 100% confidentiality, right? So soldiers who are struggling with various things know that they can come talk to the chaplain and know that that's not going to be reported. So and the idea is that creates a safe space to get them the help that they need.
Yeah, you're like a confidant, a peer confidant. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd say 80% of it is that kind of thing, just walking with soldiers through various life struggles. I offer a worship service every month. Have half a dozen to 10 soldiers who will come, and we'll do a Bible study or little sermon and just talk some stuff through. And then the rest is sort of working as a staff officer and participating in the planning for the unit, advising the command about how the morale is, matters of ethics if those come up, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so maybe just to get into this a little bit, like being a pastor, being a military chaplain, you've already got 2 gigs. What caused you or led you to run for office? And what kind of maybe political theology changes did you go through from the time you became a pastor to the time you decided to run for office? Like why did that feel compelling or desirable for you?
Yeah. So I would, to answer that, I really have to sort of go back to my seminary years. And I think we talked about this perhaps in a previous episode a long time ago that I don't expect anybody to remember, but I come from a pretty fundamentalist conservative background. So I grew up in a pretty fundamentalist conservative Christian organization. And so when I got to seminary in 2013, I was still pretty conservative. And to my professor's credit, they were very patient with me as I sort of smartassly tried to, push back with with some of my fundamentalist views, and they helped me sort of work through those. But I really began to undergo a theological and political shift while I was in seminary, um, and so a few things were happening concurrently. Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson.
Mhm.
And that's about the time that I started paying attention more seriously to national events. I started getting involved in Twitter at that time. And so I started asking the question, why is why are these people setting their own community on fire? And I had a moment of empathy where I said, I realized if the systems that were supposed to protect me continually hurt me and my people, I might feel the need to do that too. And I sort of connected this with our own history of the American Revolution and realized this dichotomy that we support what happened in the revolution, at least in some ways, or at that time I did, as a response to injustice. And so I had this moment of empathy. Okay, I understand that systems are failing people, and that's why this is happening. And so it's a wake up moment. At the same time, in seminary, I'm studying the Old Testament prophets, the Hebrew prophets. And growing up, when we studied the prophets were merely predictors of Jesus,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right.
And so now I'm studying them in their context and reading their messages of justice, how they're calling to account these people who claim to love God and serve God, but they're letting injustice run rampant, and how God, will say things like, your sacrifices are offensive to me. And so all of this is sort of gelling in my mind. And then move on to the, my New Testament classes. And I see Jesus now in the tradition of the prophets doing the same kind of thing, calling to account those who are in power, those who are using religious and political power to exploit the people. And so I start talking about this stuff on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, what I'm learning. And for the first time in my life, people start calling me liberal. And I said, "Well, I'm not liberal. This stuff is just biblical. I'm not liberal. This stuff is just reality." And I'm bringing in statistics from new books that I'm reading, The Color of Law and the New Jim Crow and
Hmm.
these economic books. And I'm just talking about facts and scripture. And all of a sudden, people that I had grown up with were really mad at me. And I'd abandoned the faith and I'm liberal. And I said, I just, these are the facts to me. And so eventually I said, okay, if that makes me liberal, it makes me liberal. I think it's true. So I started talking about this more and more and more on social media, built a fairly significant following on social media through these conversations. Also through maybe some incendiary shit posting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was in those conversations with people that really was for me the public square that helped sharpen and shape my my thinking. But all of this leads to a progression for me where I come to what was an epiphany for me and I know that I wasn't the first person to ever think of this or articulate it this way, but it was an epiphany for me where I realized that charity will never fix what bad policy creates. Um,
Hmm.
and I sort of saw how, Christians were all about charity on one hand, but then their political actions are supporting the very systems that make the charity necessary.
When you say
Um,
charity, just to
yeah,
clarify, you're meaning benevolent giving versus using it as a synonym for like love.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. So yeah, like uh food banks and church benevolence programs and philanthropic endeavors, right?
Yeah.
It's all good. But I realize that so much of this stuff is band-aids on bullet holes. And these problems are actually created upstream by bad policy. Um, and at the same time, I'm seeing this sort of rise of white Christian nationalism, and people who are using the language of Christianity to justify this increasingly authoritarian political philosophy. Um, at the same time that they are denigrating poor and immigrants and women. And so for me, it was sort of somebody needs to do something. And then when I realized somebody needs to do something, well, I'm somebody. Maybe I should do more than just scream into the void of Twitter, and try to get involved in a more meaningful way, which is sort of how the endeavor to run for office came about.
Man, I have so many questions. I guess then, I think many of us come from a tradition where politics and faith are supposed to be separate, that spirituality is compromised or polluted or contaminated by being political. And a lot of those people who said that 10 years ago are being are swooning for Christian nationalism now. But also there remains, I think, a large segment of white evangelical Christians who believe that getting involved in what we call politics is um, is dangerous because you're going to become a wicked animal in this. The system will eat you up. Your best intentions are nothing in compared to the principality and power of politics. I assume that you disagree with that, Thomas, but I would love to hear you talk about what are some of the biblical theological convictions that you have um, that led you to run for secular state political office.
Yeah. So my own trajectory again, coming from a pretty intensely theologically and politically conservative area, I went through that where I you know, was probably Christian nationalist before it had a name, when I was younger, right? Believing that fusion of
Mm-hmm.
um, conservative politics and Christianity, and we should enforce morality. When I realized that was wrong, I went through what I describe as like my white Anabaptist phase,
Mm.
very influenced by like Greg Boyd, right, and some of these others, where the worst thing that ever happened to the church was when it got in bed with Constantine,
Yeah.
right,
Like
and
that's Stanley Hauerwas, Greg Boyd.
yes, yeah, exactly. And so I had a phase for a while, like exactly that. When Christians get involved with politics, it just Christianizes. It's politics that corrupts Christianity. It's not Christianity that Christianizes politics. And so I went through that phase where like we disengaged for a while. Um, but at some point in that, I realized that I could disengage politically with very little cost to myself, right? It was a real privileged position, because the systems work for people who look like me.
Mm.
And so I can be apolitical, and I can be neutral because it doesn't affect me. And as I got to know other people whose very lives were politicized by the color of their skin, by their sexual orientation, by their socioeconomic status, right? They didn't have the privilege to disengage politically um, without a cost. And so I had to wrestle with, okay, what do I do with that, right? And so I think my first thing was like, the first time I realized that, I said, well, I don't know if I should vote, but I'm going to give my vote away. So I had a friend who was in some of those categories. I said, let me give you my vote. Tell me how you would vote on this. And that was for a while how I reconciled, how I disengage, but still come alongside some of my friends whose lives are politicized. But as I began to think about it more, I evolved. My political theology is simply this now: politics at its best in a representative democracy is how we organize to love our neighbor in the public square. So if politics is from the Greek, it's if politics is life in the polis, life in the city, and we have a say in terms of how we organize our society, how we organize and utilize our resources, well, then the greatest commandment is to love God and love our neighbors ourselves. How do we organize to love our neighbors ourselves? And I realized that in a representative democracy, we can help shape it in that direction. And for me, running for office was consistent with that. If I could help organize our society and our resources to love my neighbor and our most vulnerable. And that's sort of how I ended up reconciling that.
Mm. I wonder then, Thomas, how you're still a pastor. And so it's not like, I don't know, maybe an oversimplistic way of thinking about this would be like, oh, because charity's never going to fix what bad policy, creates, then, okay, let's become a politician, and change the policy. And abandon the church, abandon charity, abandon benevolence, all of that kind of stuff, which is, obviously simplistic. But I wonder then, what a more holistic, integrated way of looking at these things might be then for people who recognize, I do think it's an impoverished view to just say, oh, we're just going to focus on the church stuff and it doesn't involve politics and we don't get involved with that. But how has your involvement with politics, both running for office, but also just, as a citizen, right? And your new awareness, how has that affected the way that you pastor or the way that you think the church ought to function?
For me, it's been trying to, in the way that I lead the church, help people integrate those worlds together, which is that I think we can fix all of the policy, and there's still going to be a need for charity, right?
Sure.
It's not as though if we solve policy problems that the need for charity will disappear. It will hopefully diminish. But there's still going to be people who go hungry. There's going to be people who come out, have tragedies like that. That's never going to go away. But one of the things I try to do is help people understand that if we are, with our vote, supporting the very systems that are creating the need for our charity,
right,
there's a disintegration here. So how do we love our neighbor through charity? How do we love our neighbor through politics? How do we love our neighbor, individually and corporately? And I think that's, as a pastor, that's where I try to have a holistic approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Really wise. I think one of the things that I've been discovering that coheres a bit with what you're saying is that, another way to say it is like there's humans have always lived by mutual aid. You know what I mean? And so David Graeber called it everyday communism, which is just like it. And what he means by that, he's being a little bit inflammatory because that's how he is. But what he means by that is that in general, humans have always lived as like trying to be good neighbors. It's like, oh, you need something. I have it. I'm not using it right now. You can have it. Or, our neighbor's, son is sick and we're going to rally and, and bring food over to the house. Like that very basic sense of like just helping each other out.
Right.
Is a big part of what I hear sort of liberation theologians talk about and political activists. Like a big part of it is like learning how to do this again. And I have been, I guess, excited to realize like, oh, the church does have actually some knowledge about this. You know what I mean? Like the best of churches is stuff like potluck meals,
Right.
like that's
Right.
mutual aid essentially. And so there's a lot of things that I think that are deeply embedded in church practice that the church knows how to do, that it just takes a little bit of like extra vision to say, yeah, and let's expand that now. You know what I mean? Let's expand that now and realize that that has implications for, who we vote for, yes, but also like how we react to, the troubles of our neighbors who are immigrants or Latino or in some other way, marginalized. So,
Right.
yeah, anyway, I don't think there's a question there. I just got excited by what you said. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm curious as we maybe talk more immediate, Thomas, about what's going on in our world. There's, I think, more policies being passed that create trouble for vulnerable, marginalized people. We have federal troops being deployed into cities. We've got unidentified masked agents just arresting people on the street. You've got maybe three distinct arenas of being a pastor, a chaplain, and somebody who cares about local state politics. How does all of that influence the way that you personally think of what does it mean to be a Christian in a time of hostility and violence by the government? And how do you lead a community of people to be a faithful presence in the midst of that?
Yeah. This is going to sound like a super cheesy Christian answer, but
Are you gonna say pray?
No, I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay.
I'm gonna say love. I mean love, right? Which is just the same. But I think the question in all of this is, how do I love my neighbor? Understanding Jesus's definition of neighbor is anyone that you come in contact with, right? So how do I love the immigrant? How do I love the trans person? How do I love my congregants who I know support politically what I believe to be anti-Christian? And how do I love my soldiers, the ones who are supportive of what the government is doing? And how do I love my soldiers, the ones who are not supportive of how the military is being used? And that question differs depending on the person. But some frameworks that have helped me, and I'm still working through these, is
Yeah.
one, like always tell the truth, and but do so persuasively, right? As much as is possible. And you know this, Matt, with your social media engagement. Simply naming what's happening sometimes is viewed as deeply divisive and political. Just to say this thing is happening, right? Because
Yes.
we have people who are living in different worlds.
Yes.
But there's an act of faithfulness that is just telling the truth, but trying to do so in a way that is not intentionally inflammatory or alienating those that I would like to see come around.
Hmm.
I came across a quote years ago. Somebody attributed it to Martin Luther King Jr. I haven't verified it, but it was, um, "Do I not destroy my enemy when I make him my friend?" Um, and sort of recognizing that before it becomes clear that we really are at the end of democracy, like while there's still a chance to maybe bring it back, the way that we bring it back is by convincing more people to believe what we believe and to think and act and vote and speak differently. And so I've made a real shift over the past couple of years to you knew me in my incendiary shit posting days where I would try to stir the pot and there's probably still room for that, but I think more now I'm less concerned about trying to have debates with the worst of the other side, and now I'm trying to frame things in a way that maybe my neighbor or my congregant or my soldier who has a different political philosophy than me can see that I love them and to find some sort of common ground. So tell the truth, but do it persuasively. Number two, find common ground. One of the things that has been remarkably clear to me over the past few years, starting with deployments, moving into political engagement, we really have a lot more common than we have that divides us. Even the people who seem to be so vastly different from us. And this became crystal clear to me actually in Kuwait, because I was driving from one side of Kuwait to the other, and I had this profound moment. There were shopping malls in every district and mosques on every corner, and families, going about. And I realized that these people who speak a different language, have a different religion than me, very different culture. At the end of the day, they still are just trying to earn a living, feed their kids, worship how they see fit or not, and maybe enjoy some good food and some like nice clothes. Right? There was really a lot more in common than difference, even though we had some significant differences. Came back and ran for office, and knocking on doors across this very purple district and talking with voters. They really want the same things, right? They want to have enough money to be able to live comfortably. They want their kids to be safe. They care about the cost of bills, and most of them want people to be free and enjoy life. Like, I didn't run into a lot of people who were just devils. Most of us have stuff in common, and so if we can find common ground and build on it, this is different than squishy centrism or like squishy both sidesism, right? We take a clear stand on what we believe to be right and true without demonizing somebody else who might think differently and recognizing that we have something in common with them. And one of the things that's helped me with that is learning to delineate between the architects of evil and the people who have been influenced and persuaded by them, right?
Yes.
That not everybody who has voted MAGA is the architect of that, right? And this isn't to absolve them of personal responsibility for their participation in it, but it's to recognize again the influence of systems and algorithms and media, right? There is incredible money and thought and strategy that goes into convincing people to believe what they believe. And even Google, right? Somebody came the other day and said, well, they could just Google it. But the reality is, Google will feed you the algorithms that you're already looking for. It's not as easy as people think to change your mind. It's not as easy as people think to find, contrary information. It's possible, and there is a responsibility for that. But if I can delineate in my mind, in the people that I'm talking to, between those who are intentionally creating the systems and those who are in some sense victims of it, it helps me to tell the truth perhaps more persuasively. And so I'm working on this balance of push versus pull. And I don't know if you've read Tim Alberta's The Power and the Glory.
Yeah.
But he bookends that book with the pastor who takes over his hometown church from his dad, right? Who comes in pretty liberal, and for a while, like, people really aren't loving him, he makes this decision to, instead of trying to push people, he's going to try to pull people. He's going to lay breadcrumbs and principles, and then play dumb when they start to connect the dots. Um, and so I'm playing with that as a pastor, as a chaplain, as I post publicly. Are there ways to lead people along in more winsome ways, with the hope that there's still a chance to come back from where we are.
Yeah.
And if we find ourselves in a position now where democracy really is over, that might require a different approach. But that's what I've been wrestling with over the past couple of years.
Yeah, that I'll just echo that distinction has been a helpful one for me as well. Just to recognize that there are, again, it doesn't absolve people from their foolishness or their participation in that, but there is a real vast difference between someone who is actively seeking to leverage vast quantities of money for greater domination and control, and the person who's just checking their Facebook feed and is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all this stuff is happening, and they don't really understand how it all works, and they're just they're afraid. They're afraid for their family. They're afraid, like all the messaging is geared to like hook them with their fears, and latent racism and all kinds of other stuff that's there. That's not good, but it is there's a vast difference, I think, in how you approach. I mean, even just the fact that I know people like that have been hooked into this thing. I don't personally know any of the architects of this thing. You know what I mean? Like, and so that informs things for me as well. It's just like, yeah, that, like, I don't know those people.
Right.
I don't know, and they're not reading my Substack. So, you know what I mean? Like the
Right.
people that I'm talking to are those
Right.
people. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Well, you mentioned truth telling and finding common ground, and I think we could have another hour-long conversation about, the crisis of truth, how it's been weaponized. This is the problem with propaganda and disinformation, is that you create a reality distortion field, so that increasingly it's hard to know what's true and what isn't. You've got billionaires rewriting their AI bots to not tell the truth. And so I am concerned with, Neil deGrasse Tyson had a video on Instagram where he was saying that he now believes the Earth is flat. And you're watching the video, you hear him say it, and then you see the video recede, and you notice that it's being held on a phone in the hand of Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he says, "I never said that." And the entire time you're watching this, there's no indication that it's I mean, it is completely believable that this is legit video and it's Neil deGrasse Tyson talking. And so, anyway, the 60-minute conversation would be about how the people that warned us of the dangers of postmodernity, where nothing is true, or started the 12-part video series of the Truth Project, are now ones who are held captive by the weaponization of disinformation, and how that's tragic, right? There is compassion there, but there's also complicity for them in that. If you feel comfortable, Thomas, I want to press in a little bit with what you talked about, how like caring for military personnel, some of whom, love the man in the red hat, and some who don't. Like, how do you remain? And you have like certain oaths you've sworn, right, to not speak against the president of the United States, or speak against the vice president, because they're your superiors in the chain of command. How do you inhabit that space with your convictions faithfully? And the reason I ask is because I think a lot of listeners find themselves in arenas where they don't feel free to speak their mind, but they still want to have integrity and be truthful. So how do you navigate that?
very carefully, sometimes maybe treacherously, sometimes maybe it feels cowardly. It's a constant wrestle for me. Um, so you are correct. Like as a military officer, I'm bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So I can't speak contemptuously of certain leaders. Um, so what I try to do is, as much as possible, talk about ideas, talk about principles, talk about uh, laws or policies or impacts. Um, uh, I found that I can, right? MAGA is not a person. So I can talk about MAGA as an ideology, and I can compare it to um, the teachings of Jesus, and I can um, lay those breadcrumbs, I think, in ways that still tell the truth, while keeping within the bounds. Um, but yeah, I do. I serve with military members, some of which are would very much be supportive of the MAGA agenda, and I serve with some who are very concerned about some of those things, but still have an oath to believe in their oath to the country, believe in their oath to the Constitution. And so we certainly have seen, and there has been, I think, an unprecedented politicization politicization of the military, that's making it challenging. And I think there's a lot of people who don't know how to exist in this space. Um, yeah, and then for each of us to have to decide where our lines are, right? And I've got some ideas about where my lines are, that
Yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna share on a live stream,
Right.
right? But I think that is a question that we each have to ask: is like, is there a red line at which point we have to decide?
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I'm really grateful, in my denomination. We have endorsers, um, for chaplains, and I think the Disciples of Christ has a pretty phenomenal endorser, who really encourages us to be the prophetic voice within the system so far as we are able, and will provide some cover for that, but also recognizing that we are in the system, right? I am a chaplain to the United States military, the history of which has not always been without problems.
Mhm.
Um, but within that, I also recognize some of the people who are in there are also victims to some degree, right? Understanding the way that recruitment happens, and who is targeted for recruitment. Um, and there's some dynamics there, where people, it becomes the only way out from a bad life to something else, and they don't, you know, as a military member, we don't have the legal privilege to pick and choose which conflicts we conscientiously object to.
Right.
Right. So you can become a conscientious objector, or be a conscientious objector, but you have to object to all war. Right. You can't be like, I don't want to do this particular thing. And so at some level, even soldiers are at the whims of the politicians and those who own them. And we could talk for another whole hour probably on the concepts of moral injury and what that does. And um, I want chaplains like me who aren't 100% gung ho. Everything America does is good, bleed red, white,
Mm-hmm.
and blue,
Mm-hmm.
who can help navigate some of this stuff. And so I think it's good to have, levels of resistance even within the ranks of the military.
Yeah.
But it's a constant struggle with knowing what to say and how much to say, and when is the time to, you know, is there a time, and when is the time to say, enough is enough and walk away?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is because I think it is a very clear example where you're serving and working in an organization that you have a divergence of conviction or opinion, and you have not many of us swear oaths. Many of us just have like paychecks or invitations to Thanksgiving dinner on the line.
right,
Not that those
right.
are not that those aren't insignificant, but I'm saying what you're talking about is a very intensified dynamic that most of us face, which is how do I exist in a system that I would not build if I was starting from scratch,
Mhm.
that is causing harm and damage. But there, if I opt out, then there's nobody in the system to be the minority report, or I can't opt out because it's my family, or I need employment,
Yeah,
or I'm I'm an American. I'm not really keen on moving to Honduras, and not that that system's any better. You know what I mean? Like, so there's these morally complex, no high ground to be found
mhm.
kind of environments that we all face. And I think the question for many majority culture people is how do I exist there faithfully, with integrity? Um, you I guess you could blow it all up, Thomas, but you have kids, you know,
Right, right.
and then how do you take care of your kids if you blow up your economic sustenance,
Right.
and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Um, Ben, do you have thoughts about this? I'm wondering.
Um, yeah, I don't know if my thoughts really add anything to what has already been said. I think, maybe just to sum it up, like it really is about, there's a lot of discernment that needs to happen. And I think as we think about that for ourselves, seeking wisdom and discernment is super important. Doing that in community with others, who can help us see things we're not seeing, as clearly as we
Mm-hmm.
could without them. And then also just exercising a lot of compassion and patience with others who make perhaps different choices than we do. Um, because I think anybody who's taking this seriously and trying to discern how to love, love our neighbor as ourselves best, like how does that work in an imperfect system where you can't, love every neighbor in the same way at the same time? Um, yeah, just having a lot of compassion and patience with others as we navigate that, because anybody who's wanting to do this work is like, we're on the same team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think we're on the same team if we're taking it seriously, even if we make different decisions, for various reasons. I think it's worth, yeah, it's worth that compassion and worth staying connected across that difference. Um, yeah, instead of succumbing to some kind of, purity culture where, we have to get rid of the people who don't make the same choices as we do because they're not radical enough or pure
Yeah.
enough for
And that
us.
and that space doesn't, I mean, the reality is that space doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah, you're gonna whittle it down to yourself,
Yeah.
eventually. So.
Let's buy some land in Idaho and start a
Mm-hmm.
compound.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas, I really appreciate you spending time with us today, talking through these things. Keenly aware that you mentioned the red line. Like, what's the point? what's the point where you have to change what you're doing, because to not change what you're doing um,
Yeah.
would be, you couldn't bear it,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And I think just maybe to close us, like circling back to your call to love, like what does love require of me here? And I just want to name something that I think you're inhabiting. For instance, being a chaplain in the military, you have access to love people that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Mhm.
And to do that comes at a cost to you, right? So love always costs us, but then you also are, you know, you also are bearing the tension of that environment for the sake of other people. And I think I want to name that because I think it's worth celebrating or acclaiming. But it's also something that most of us do,
Right.
and we don't name the cost that causes to our psyche, our mental health, our emotional health, our bodies. And I
Right.
just want to name that because it's a real cost, and um, it is how love works. So thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.